thanks, Nate, for the introduction. Thanks, Federated, for allowing me to be here tonight. And thank you guys for putting up with me. I think Nate had suggested that I talk for 3 or 4 hours tonight. By the way, if I tell a joke next, I won't raise my hand. Thank you. I will tell you this. I've worked with Federated for over 20 years, and I've been doing this for more than 20 years, over 25 years. And they didn't pay me to say this. This is the only insurance company that I have seen consistently work with their clients to try to get them in front of an attorney to talk about estate succession planning. Now that's self-serving for me to say, but I will tell you, they are the only company that I've worked with. I've worked with lots that do what they do. Tonight, I'm going to, we do a lot of, our firm does, and I do a lot of estate and succession planning. And by the way, if anybody can't hear me in the back, just let me know. I'll speak up louder. I don't know if I can get as loud as Nate, but I'll do my best. But we do a lot of it, and because of it, I think we look at estate and succession planning a little differently than most. And I will suggest to you some of the things that Nate put up there. You need to think about from a succession planning standpoint. It's not, and I'll talk about this in more detail, it's not about taxes as much as about other issues. About 20 years ago, I was at the NYU Tax Institute, and there was a room full of 300 or 400 CPAs, lawyers, and a partner from a very large law firm stood up and she said, the statistics that Nate said, 70% of all businesses will fail from G1 to G2, 85% will fail from G2 to G3, and you're less than 5% from G3 to G4. Do you know whose fault it is? And she went like this. It's your fault. It's the advisor's fault. Because they don't communicate the statistics and the importance of it to their clients. And so that's when I really started to talk about succession planning, and I'm going to talk to you about succession planning that's different than estate planning, although we'll talk about estate planning, wills and trusts and powers of attorney. But I really can't emphasize that there's a big, big difference between succession planning and just estate planning. So I have a real hard time following a PowerPoint, and so I will occasionally digress. So if it's not up there, it's because I've gone off on a tangent. I will say this, if anybody has any questions, as Nate said, I'd much rather this be a dialogue. I have found that your question is probably a question everybody else wants to ask. If I don't know the answer, I'll just make it up. If anybody doesn't feel comfortable asking a question, my contact information is in the file. Don't hesitate to email me. And again, I would ask that you please consider filling out that evaluation form. I am always looking for feedback, except from my wife, which she gives it to me anyway. That's another. Come on, you guys got to pick it up. Thank you. I will say this, and Nate was kind enough to say it. Hopefully by next month, but May at the very latest. It only took me 4 years. I will be publishing a book. It's called The Succession Solution, The Complete Guide to Transition Planning. Doesn't that sound sexy? It's bound to be an international bestseller. But if anybody wants a free download, let me know, and I'll send it to them. And then when it sort of comes up on Amazon, you guys can help me out and put me on the Amazon bestseller list. So, Nate talked a little bit about this, and of course he steals my thunder all the time. He's much more handsome and he's better looking, but I'm still going to follow to the extent I can in my part. But by the way, that was a joke too. And Nate talked about
They agreed with you, Brad.
Thank you. The importance of the closely held business owner. But family businesses are not just small businesses. As you can see, a third of them are Fortune 500 companies, and you can see the impact they have on the gross national product. So again, let me ask you, by a show of hands, how many Generation 1, so it's first generation business owners do we have? Okay. Can you raise it up a little more? Just one second. Okay. How about G2? And any G3s? Oh, congratulations. Anybody beyond G3? Wow. They beat the statistics. So I will tell you that in my experience, and I think most of the quote unquote literature will tell that the first generation, they have it the toughest for succession success. So why is that? Well, I would bet if we talk to the G2s and the G3s, they had to experience something that probably was kind of like making sausage, right? You wouldn't want to see it being done, but once it's done, it's not so bad. But they have seen it, and they know how important it is. Most Generation 1 business owners are entrepreneurs, and it's really, really hard to lift a company off the ground, and it becomes your identity, and it is hard to think about letting it go. So I will just stop and just mention to you that I think you've got it tougher than G2 and G3, but I will again explain what I think is a path to success, and I will also tell you why I think the failure is so high at every generation. Okay? So what is a family business? I'm sure there are a number of non-family business owners here, but I thought it would be important because family business is when there are more than one family member involved in the business, whether that is by ownership or just by employment, and there's usually one dominant person that has a controlling interest. It becomes, as you might imagine, more difficult when you get to G2 or G3 because you have an entrepreneur that has a majority interest. He has children, maybe 2 children, and they probably don't see life the same way. I mean, I have 2 children brought up by the same parents in the same household, and they're completely different. A story I just heard yesterday, as a matter of fact, where a gentleman was an entrepreneur. He had 3 daughters, trying to get involved in the business. He was getting ready to retire, and asked each one of them what they wanted to have happen with the business while he continued to run it at this time. The first one said, distribute everything we possibly can. You can't have a company. We got to pay for college, for the kids. The second one said, no, leave the money in there. Leave the money in there because we need to have jobs for our children when they get older. And the third one says, I don't care what you do, Dad, do whatever you want. Well, so you can see there are 3 different answers, and that can potentially create conflict. So these are the typical family businesses. And it becomes more difficult as you get deeper and deeper into the generations. Another interesting statistic, most business owners want to pass on their business to family members. Although some just want to sell it, most people want to pass it on. 85% would like to pass it on to a family member. This is an interesting statistic, and actually they came out with a 2017 report, which is even worse than that, and Nate had mentioned this. By the way, let me also say this. A succession plan in your head is not a succession plan. You may think it's a succession plan, you may have an idea of who will take over, but that is not a succession plan. And so more than 2/3 of business owners do not have any type of writing as to what their succession plan is. And we'll talk about this when we get to the will. A will is not a succession plan. A will can screw up a succession plan, but it is certainly not a succession plan. Okay, so maybe I should have started the conversation with this. It's okay, what the heck is succession planning? You know, they talked about, you know, will and a power of attorney and a living will, and I promise we'll get to that. But I think it's important that we take a step back and understand what we're talking about. Because, in my opinion, there are two types of succession. There's the succession of ownership, and then there's a succession of management. And the two of them can be completely separate, or they can be one in the same. In larger, closely held business owners, especially when you get to G2 or G3, it is not unusual to have a quote-unquote non-family member running the show. You find a key person, and you want that person to be you want to say management, you want them in management, you want them leading the company. I think it was Warren Buffett, I'm going to get this quote wrong, but it is in my book, so you have to follow it, who said, you know, trying to pick the 2020 leader, CEO, from the first generation is like trying to pick the 2020 gold medal winner from the 1960 medals. I mean, the idea is it's really hard to find the successor within the family because it becomes, your universe becomes much smaller. So don't think that just because you own the stock, just because you have a child in the business, and you might want to transfer the ownership to them, he or she has to be in charge. But so there's a distinction between management and ownership. So let me give you another spin on this. A number of years ago, a Federated client came to me, and his son was running the business. But like many people, when I say this affectionately, he's passed away, he was a control freak. Most business owners don't want to give up control. So he meets with me, he says, Brad, he said, look, I've given 49% of the stock to my son. I'd like to give him more. He's running the show, but I'm not going there. I don't want to give up control because he may go off on a tangent. So I said, well, look, I'll call him Richard. Look, Richard, if I were able to show you how you could maintain control but give your son 99% of the company, would you be willing to do that? He said, well, you can't do that. And he actually became a little indignant with me. And I said, well, let me explain to you how you do that, right? And so I just want to share this with you. I'm just trying to give you the distinction between management ownership and control, right? So what we did is we simply created voting and non-voting stock. And we gave the son 99% of the company, so he owned 99% of the company. If the company made $100, $99 would go to the son, and the one would go to the father. But as far as selling the company, the compensation of everybody, buying equipment, the father still had control. When we got over that hump, and he saw that his son still didn't, go off the reservation, he felt comfortable transferring that last piece. Don Shula has a line, and I use it for succession planning. It's the start that stops most people. If there are three parts that are difficult in a succession plan, it's these three things, and I'll get into this in a little more detail. It's the start. People don't know how to start the process. And I would suggest to you that just being here, you start the process by educating yourself. And then you can talk to your Federated people and you can talk to me, and you don't have to talk to me. You might have a very good lawyer. I'm sure he's very, very good, or she's very, very good. Maybe not as good as me. I'm sure she'll get you. Thank you very much. So that's a start. The second one is what we talked about earlier. You got to get a plan in writing. There's a great book called Legacy that says action without a plan is nightmare, and a plan without action is nothing but a dream. So you start, you put a plan in place, and you execute. With my example of this gentleman, he put a plan in place, executed on it, and then we got it going. And when he passed away, we saved a tremendous amount of taxes. There were 2 other family members, 2 other siblings that were screaming and yelling while Dad was doing this. But thank goodness it was done while he was alive, because had he passed away and not done it, it would have been miserable. I was going to say all hell broke up, but I was trying to be polite. So, thank you. Now, I said that an estate plan, I skipped that part, an estate plan is not a succession plan. And it is, but an estate plan can certainly mess up a succession plan. So that, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful when I say this, I'm just sort of giving you an example. If you want your son or your daughter to take over the business, but at your passing, you transfer everything to your wife or husband, who's not involved in the business, they will take over. And by the way, you may be okay with that, but understand that you need to coordinate your will with your succession plan, and that also includes your management team. I just got done working with a very large contract family business, 2nd generation going to 3rd generation. The gentleman's 70 years old, and we sat down and worked on the plan. And I'll get into this also in a moment. And one of the reasons that he felt it was so important to have a plan in place and communicate was to be able to recruit and keep good employees. Because employees get nervous when the old man or the old woman, using the vernacular, they don't know what's happening. And uncertainty breeds all sorts of problems. Whereas if you say, look, I'm here, and my son's going to be in charge, or Dave's going to be in charge, we have a plan for succession, this company is going to continue without me. And oh, by the way, when you do that, your company becomes much more valuable if you go and sell the company. And by the way, that is an effective succession planning strategy. Right? You can sell the company, you can transfer it down to the next generation of employees, or you can transfer to your family members. But if you are going to go sell the company, and we do this a lot for clients, what you need to become is insignificant. You need to become meaningless in your organization. Because if I go, because I know this guy, the Skander Tire, and I know how important Mr. Skander is to the organization, and I buy his business, when I buy his business, he's going to retire, I'm going to have a problem with this business. He needs to make himself to a point where I don't need him. And so if you have a succession plan with strong management, I apologize for picking on this. With strong management, you are going to be your company is going to be much more valuable. So, I keep moving around here. So why do I need a succession plan? And again, we're going to get to the will and the taxes, but this is so important to me, and I'm so passionate about it. I want to make sure I pass this on. So. You need to prepare for when you retire. You need a succession plan. There's only so many moves that you can make when you leave your company. Right? You can leave feet first and do nothing, and that's one of the reasons why businesses fail. You can transfer it down to the next generation of employees or family members, or you can sell it. Of course, there's another one, you can just shut it down, and people do that. So the question is, what I tell people, the longer you wait to do anything, the less options you have. Right? So the extreme example is you wait until you die and you do nothing. Okay, then, what do you care? You're gone, right? But most people that I talk to feel just as much or almost as much compassion and care for their employees and the families of the employees as they do their children. And so they don't want to create a problem for them. So preparing for when you retire. What happens in the event that you get hit by the proverbial truck? It happens, right? Securing through transition. I had, many years ago when I first started practicing law, a gentleman had a sign business. He painted signs. And he had a cherry picker, and he fell off it. And he was in a coma. And he was a young guy, had a wife, kids. He had nothing in place. No power of attorney, no, by the way, he was a good end to the story in some respect. He did recover a month later. He came out of a coma. At that point in time, the business was shut down. She couldn't write a check. She couldn't make payroll, because she otherwise would have spent thousands of dollars in going to court in a month and a half to 2 months to have him declare incapacitated. He had nothing and he lost the business. And he had to start back over again. And it was tragic, and I felt terrible. So you've got to understand that kind of stuff can happen. I already talked about maximizing return on your investment, and the other part is, although we are living in an unusual tax environment at this time, until Oprah gets elected. That's so hard. Because, again, I don't want to steal my thunder too early, but, right now, husband and wife can protect up to $22 million from federal state tax before you get taxed. But it hasn't always been like that, and I guarantee you it will not stay like that. But your succession plan will help you save the taxes, right? So what are the important parts of the succession plan? You want to identify the owners and the managers. You want to make sure there's an orderly transfer of how you want to do this, and address the transfer of ownership in the case of an unplanned departure. And again, I read, I work with clients, I do a whole lot of material, work in this area, and I will tell you that it is really important to have a document in writing, but it's just as important to communicate it at some high level with your important stakeholders. So that's a new term. What the heck is a stakeholder, right? The people that are important to your business, right? It may be your spouse, it may be a child, it may be a key management, but let me ask you this question. Is your spouse, is your child, is your key managers, are they better off not knowing anything and something happens to you than if you shared some information with them and something happened to you? And this is one of the, I think, the most difficult parts of estate and succession planning for families that have accumulated some wealth. And we'll talk about estate planning in particular. So, we are as much as Nate says, we are truly, I think, a Midwestern city. Now, I used to think I lived on the east until I went to Penn State, and they said, "East, you're a Midwestern city." And Midwestern values and cultures are, you don't talk about money. There's a certain values of humility, conservative, and so. And I used to, when I would ask my mother or father how much they made, I almost got hit because it was considered rude, right? They hit you. But the point is, so the hard part for you guys is, what do you tell your children? So on one hand, you say, look, if I tell my kids, I'm not talking about a 6-year-old, I'm talking about young adults. If I tell my kid, hey, our business is worth $5 million, our business is worth $10 million, I make $400,000 a year from the business. Of course, they don't understand that you have to invest it. The fear is, they are going to become, you're enabling them not to work. I don't have to work. Mom and dad will take care of me, right? And so people are reluctant to talk to kids about their net worth, right? But on the other hand, are you penalizing them? Are you not preparing them properly? Because if something were to happen to you, well, holy cow, I'm not prepared for this. I'm not telling you I have the answer. The answer is what you're comfortable with. I'm just telling you that if you guys are sort of struggling with this issue, it is a common issue that many people struggle with. Again, I would argue, first, let me say this. The answer, I think, is you need to educate the next generation. You don't have to give them your net worth statement. You don't have to tell them what's in your bank account, but you need to educate them about the business, about succession planning, about, look, this is our expectation. What are your expectations with respect to the business to help them better prepare? The reality is your business generates, and again, I'm not saying this is everybody, but the reality is statistics will say that 50 to 75% of your net worth is in this business. Right? And so most people that I work with, they are looking at their business as their retirement. Whether that is a stream of income, whether that is to sell it to the kids, whether it's to sell it outright. Right now we're doing an ESOP because we have a very successful business and the 2 children do not want to be in the business, but the gentleman wants and cares about his employees, and I think that's going to work beautifully as well. Some have an idea on the value of their business, but I will tell you that is probably one of the most difficult things for a business owner, and I would just suggest to you, again, talk about free advice. Before I went to law school, I was a CPA. I know it's exciting for you guys to know that, but I have a financial background, and Federated will do evaluation for you. And I would think that would be one thing everybody in this room, sorry Nate for asking you guys to do this, everybody in this room should get that, just to give you some thumbnail, third-party opinion of the value of your company. Again, the federal exemption is $11 million. Maybe your business is worth $11 million. It wouldn't surprise me if there's some people in this room that have a business over $11 million. But again, I'm jumping ahead here. In 2025, you know what happens to that $11 million exemption? It drops down to $5 million. And depending on who gets elected, it may change. I mean, I just heard, I was listening to the news, and Gillibrand, is that the woman that's running for president? She wants to give by the way, this is very noble, she wants to give every teacher a $15,000 raise. And they said, okay, fine, well, where are you going to get it? She says, the estate tax. We're going to lower the estate tax. So, you are a target. I will just tell you that right now for some politicians. Also, some people say, when should I start succession planning? And I will tell you that I think that's an inappropriate question. You should have, it's like saying, when should you start to do a will? You should have a will. You should have a succession plan. It is essentially the will for your business. So the next question is, we talked a little bit of this, will you, and to what extent will you get family involved in the conversation? Some people say, look, I can't talk to my family about this, and that's okay. I try to tell people, you got to talk to people with batteries included. If you can't have an adult conversation with certain members of your family, don't have it. But if you want the business to go to the next generation, at some point in time, you need to have that conversation. You need to let them know what's happening. You know, I was, again, I'm working with this little large family, and they're struggling because all the family members want to come to work after college. They think they have an automatic job. And, you know, a friend of mine in college, I won't mention his name, his father had a food processing company. And he didn't really work hard in school and said, I'm going to go work for my dad's business. I'm going to go work for my dad's business. I'm going to go work for my dad. You know this is ending, right? The year before he graduates from college, his dad sold the business. He didn't know what to do. And so, you know, this talks about, you know, getting the family involved. The dad was planning to sell the business for years. He didn't want to tell his son. So did he do his son any favors? Maybe he couldn't talk to his son about it. So if there is one page in this outline that I think it is the most important, it's this one. And I want to just make sure I go through this, and you'll explain why. So the succession solution, the book that I wrote, this is the backbone of a succession plan. And then again, we get into some of the nuts and bolts and stuff. And I've spent years and years and years in this area, and if you can go answer these questions, and you can do this on a single piece of paper, you are 95% ahead of most succession plans. Because many succession plans are the 25, 30-page plan you pay thousands and thousands of dollars for, you stick in a drawer and nobody talks about it. Or it's the one in your head. And by the way, in the book, there is the form that you can follow. And I think it was Einstein, I'll get this wrong, who said, if you can't explain it simply, if you can't lay it out simply, and it can't be understood simply, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's why I think this is very, very simple. So let me sort of go through this. When I meet with a family business and we're talking about the succession plan, it's not a estate plan. One of the things I try to do is to say, okay, what are the important values of you and your family? What are important? What's important to you? Is it integrity? Is it fairness? Is it serve the customer first? What's important to you? Harvard Business Review did a study of 300 successful businesses, and they looked at the values that they had listed. And 90% of them were consistent with one another, which is kind of obvious. So why do you have to put down your values and why do you stay there? Because I guarantee you there will, has anybody run their business who have family members and there's never been a conflict with family members? I'm talking about Joe. You use your values to resolve your disputes when you do succession planning. Like the 3 daughters. Hey, I would distribute all the money. Keep all the money in there. I don't care what you do with it. Okay, what are our values, right? Our values are to grow this company, to move to the next generation, to provide for families. So maybe we'll do, you know, a 30% distribution, or 40% distribution. All right. Number 2, where do you want to go with this thing? Where is your ultimate vision? So you are gone. This is your legacy. Where is that lighthouse out there that you want to get to? Well, what I'd like to, Brad, is I'd like to ultimately have the business transferred down to my kids, although they're not prepared yet, and I'm not ready to do it, but ultimately I think I want my kids to do that. Okay, so one of the things you might say is, well, let's make sure we start educating your kids, or let's get them involved in the business, or let's ask them if they want to get in business. But ultimately, what's your vision? So you got your values, your vision. Then the example I give is, so you know what your value system is, and you know where you want to go. The example I give is, so I go to Ross Park Mall. I hate the malls. I go to Ross Park Mall, and I lost my earbuds, you know, those things they stick in there, and I had to get to the Apple Store. So what's the first thing that I do when I go to Ross Park Mall? I look for that big board, and I say, where am I? And they say, you're here, and I want to get here. So the next thing you need to do is, okay, if that's where I want to go, and this is my values, where am I right now to know where I need to go? well, I don't have a will, I don't have a power of attorney, I haven't told anybody what I'm gonna do, but I want to transfer the ownership, or I have a partner, and we have no buy-sell agreement. So you do and this is where I think we can help, and look at what your current documents say. Before you sort of know where you want to go on the map, you got to find out where you are on the map. Right? So then I say, all right, we got our value system, our ultimate vision. Let's find out where we are, and so what are our strengths, our opportunities, and obstacles? What do we have that can help us? Our strengths might be, for one gentleman, one company we're working with, is our strength is we got plenty of time. These were all young guys. They had a 10-year time horizon. So one of our strengths was we got plenty of time. What are our opportunities if we accomplish this? With this construction company that I talked about, one of the opportunities, hey, we want to recruit some really strong people, and our competitors are saying, actually I had a nephew who's kind of a dynamo sales guy walk away from an insurance brokerage firm downtown because someone whispered into his ear that the two brothers that own this insurance company are ready to sell it because they have no succession plan. Because they don't talk about it, right? They couldn't recruit people, so that was an opportunity. But here's what I want to tell you, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Is obstacles. There's a great book called Upside, and it's a strategic planning book, and they talk about if you want to find your opportunities, find your obstacles. What is preventing you from accomplishing this? My wife would kill me if I transferred the business down to the next generation. Or my husband would shoot me if I transferred it. Or my brother, who owns 50% of the company, will never allow me to transfer business down to my kids. You need to find where your problems are. What is preventing you from accomplishing? So now, you establish your values, you got your vision, you know where you are, you get your strengths, opportunities. That's kind of a SWOT analysis that people have heard of that. It's okay. If we're sitting here we can't boil the ocean, right? That's what I try to tell people. We do this in small bites. So we're sitting here 3 years from today. What has to happen for you to feel good about your success in 3 years? All right, well, in 3 years, I'd like to, see if my daughter's involved in the business, send her to some training programs, have a conversation with my brother about transferring the business. I'd like to have a buy-sell agreement. So list what you want to have happen in 3 years and what's preventing that. Then you go from 3 years, okay, if that's what we want to be in 3 years, what do we want to do the next 12 months? And you list that down. And then if you got that down, say, okay, as you might think naturally, what do you want to do in the next 90 days? Another good book called The 12-Week Year. And the guy says, if you look at life in quarters, it's far enough out that you can accomplish stuff, but close enough that you'll get stuff done. And then of course you execute. A goal without execution is nothing but a dream. Where'd you hear that before? So really, I think that if you could sort of follow this process, I'd love to help you. I'm available. You don't need me to accomplish this. There are millions and millions of books out there. I'm telling you, it's basically distilled down to this: if you can accomplish that. So, what are some of the obstacles, the things that you need to worry about? And I want to be mindful of the time here. So, again, these are things that many of you probably have experienced. From a governance issue, you got family members that don't agree. Anybody that has more than one owner in the business, you probably don't see eye to eye with those folks. You don't have to agree 100%, but what I try to tell people is just find a common ground. They want to find a common ground as much as you do. As I said, some people, look, I'm not interested in business, just distribute the cash. There is inadequate formal decision-making policies and structures. And this one I get serious pushback on, but I just want to get it out there. Most of you probably don't have any type of formal board of directors. For G2 and G3, when the family gets a little bigger, you should consider that. You should try to get somebody, a friend, someone that you respect to be on that board, because it's easier for them to call BS on a family member that's getting out of control than not. But I will tell you, when you look at the statistics, when you have a little more formality, people say, well, formality is a big pain, it slows the process down. I would suggest to you, if it doesn't, actually it helps you accomplish lots of very, very hard questions. Those questions that are in the back of your mind that are gnawing at you, but you don't want to sort of address because you're afraid it's going to create all sorts of problems. The business issues, family members that think they're entitled. There are governance issues. A lot of this can be addressed with respect to employment agreements and bylaws, but you got to get there first. So the question you need to ask yourself, are you motivated? Do you want to make a change? Will you share the information? You don't have to share the information. You just have to ask yourself the question. I mean, lots of the clients that come to me and say, well, what should I do with my will, my power of attorney? Should I give it to my kids? And normally I say you don't, because you might change it. And if you change it and they are changed in the will, it's going to bother them probably. So you might want to give them some direction as to what you're taking care of, the wills with the attorney, this kind of stuff. How much are you willing to share? And is there time to make is there time to make and correct mistakes? You will not get it perfect. You want to be able to adjust. Stephen Covey talks about the plane that takes off. It's off course 95% of the time. You constantly need to readjust as you see your children. Since my two kids were born, I've changed my will 3 times. The only change it is I'm extending the time when my kids get the money. I love my kids, but they gotta get their act together. So and this is again, if a will is critical for estate planning, this is critical if you have more than one shareholder. I can't stress the need to have a good buy-sell agreement. If you haven't done one in 20 years, if you haven't updated in 20 years or 50 years, it's really, really, really important to take a look at that to make sure it works, whether it's determining the price, how it's transferred. And there are all sorts of ways, and there are all sorts of tax benefits. So again, just one quick tax benefit, if there are 2 shareholders, you can actually do it more, but if there's 2 shareholders, and these guys at Federated are very, very good. If you're buying life insurance to fund the buying of a shareholder, some people have the corporation own the life insurance policy. So if myself and Michelle back there are 2 50-50 shareholders and the corporation has insurance, I pass away, it buys me out, that's fine. But a better approach, if we started a company from ground zero, and the company was worth $2 million when I pass away, Michelle the next day turns around and sells it for $2 million, she's got a $2 million gain, right? But contrast it with this example. Instead of the corporation owning a policy on my life, Michelle's life, Michelle has a policy on my life, and I have a policy on her life. I pass away, she gets $1 million, let's say, because that's the value of half the business. She gets $1 million tax-free. She buys my interest out, which, by the way, when I die, my estate pays no tax because we get this thing called a step-up in basis. So if the value of my business is value of my interest is $1 million, and my estate gets $1 million, there's no tax. Michelle has the company now just like before. She owns 100% of it. It's worth $2 million. When she goes to sell it for $2 million, what's her basis? Her basis is $1 million. She just saved, about $250,000 in taxes just by changing the title of how life insurance policies are. So this is the kind of stuff you want to just double check. It's like, I don't know how many people go to a doctor every year. I'm not telling you to go to an attorney every year, although I would welcome to see you. You can't stick these in a drawer. The other one is a problem is is the value. And here's the classic one too. Someone passed away or there's a dispute, and the buy-sell agreement says the value of the business will be on Schedule A, which we will update every year. I've been doing this close to 30 years. I have never, ever seen that schedule updated. So if you do that, just be mindful that you're running into a problem, because then when there's a problem, everybody sort of goes into their respective corners and starts to fight, right? So that's a corporate redemption is when the corporation buys it. A cross purchase is when Michelle and I will buy it. In a hybrid is really, you only do really a cross purchase at death. All the other ones can be a corporate purchase. The typical events that trigger a sale, because most business owners have another shareholder, they want to keep the stock within the family or within themselves. They don't want little Johnny or little Susie getting, especially if it's a nephew or a niece. So you normally address what happens in the stock in the event of death, disability, someone leaves, they terminate their employment, or they just want to sell, or for, if someone gets divorced. Another small item I'll tell you, I've run into this, and most people get it wrong, and I don't have any specific authority, but this is really important. I am not a family lawyer, but I did stay at Holiday Inn Express. That was fun. No, I work with a lot of family lawyers. In the event of a divorce, a family judge will not necessarily respect the buy-sell agreement. So if the buy-sell agreement says, book value, or book value plus the appraised value of the real estate, the judge may say, I'll pull my own valuation personally. That's problematic. There's nothing you can do about it, but just be mindful of it. And I'm not telling people to get prenuptial agreements when they pass their business on to the next generation, but you need to address a divorce in the event of a buy-sell. And I talked about funding a buyout. Certainly at death, the life insurance is the easiest way to go. It becomes a real burden on the company when someone passes away, they run the company, and they got to come up with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And how you hold that life insurance is really important.
Can you fund that life insurance out of the business, or would each partner have to pay separately?
You can fund it out of the business, and that's how it's done a lot, but life insurance is not deductible. And so the corporation doesn't get a deduction for it, but it can. Normally what happens is they'll bonus the money out of the corporation to pay the premiums. So let's talk a little bit about taxes. Again, we are in remarkable times. The exemption has never been this big. When I started, the exemption was $600,000. I was told at the last minute, because no one predicted this, at the last minute there was a senator out in I think Nebraska, don't hold me to it, her family lost a family farm and over estate taxes, and she wanted the exemption, she wanted it eliminated. She wanted the federal estate tax system to be eliminated, which by the way, as many of you may or may not know, it represents a sliver of our budget, even when it was at $500,000. But, so it got to $11.4 million. It sunsets in 2026. When we talk about the federal, your estate, it's everything that you own, no matter where you own it. Whether that's in Wyoming or in the UK, it's everything that you own. And life insurance, although not subject to income tax, it's subject to estate tax. So if you're bumping up close to these numbers, you can transfer, which I'll talk about briefly, the insurance into a trust. By the way, you can transfer, this is a side, as a married guy, I'm always looking for the benefits of being married. Thank goodness my wife's not here. I'm trying to. But what I was going to say was, you can transfer an unlimited amount of money to your spouse. So if you had a $100 million estate at the first death, you don't pay any tax. You can always transfer money to your spouse. And from a tax standpoint, although I don't want you guys to rely on it, if your business represents more than 35% of your estate, which many times it does, you can pay the tax over, the estate tax, over 10 years installment plan. Not many people do that, but I just want to let you know it's out there. Here's Pennsylvania, which is becoming more prominent now because most people are not subject to federal estate tax. 4.5%, it's zero to spouse, 4.5% to lineal descendants. That's children, grandchildren, parents, grandparents. Siblings is 12%, and then charities. So everybody else, that's 15%, everyone else. I don't know why it says everyone else spouse. That was a typo, I apologize. So there's only a few ways to pay the taxes. You got the cash. Most people don't have a lot of cash. They have the cash in their business, but you certainly pay cash. You can borrow the money. You can sell assets. You can buy life insurance. The federal rate didn't tell me to say that. That's just a reality. Most closely held business owners, the lion's share of their net worth, as I said earlier, is in your business. It's hard to turn those into dollar bills. Oh, by the way, they want paid in 9 months. And if you prepay within 90 days, you get a discount. So having liquidity is really, really important. Maybe when you sell your business, you might not need the life insurance, and they don't probably throw something at you for saying that. But certainly while you have your business, you have an illiquid asset that's going to be subject to tax. I mentioned this earlier. One of the nice things about, if there is anything nice about passing away, is if I started a company that from ground zero that's worth $10 million, and I sold it today and have a $10 million gain, if I pass away with it, and it would be subject to inheritance tax, or even if it's not subject to tax, and my estate sells it, there's no gain. You get a step-up basis. That's your business, that's your stocks, that's your bonds, that's your house. I guess that's sort of one of the get-out-of-jail cards for paying employee taxes. Right. So when I first got married, I told my wife, being a smart aleck that I am, hey, if I pass away, you get the first $30,000, and you have to split it between my mother and yourself. So how long did it think it took me to get a will? That's just a joke. You don't want to die without a will. It's expensive. In law school, we hear about the doctrine of laughing heirs. That's H-E-I-R-S. The doctrine of laughing heirs is when they're lowering you in to the grave, people that never liked you, that are related to you, is getting your estate. And so you definitely want to have it. So, you need to be over 18, of capacity. And this is where I think for married people, it's important that I sort of make this point. Again, half joke but half serious. In Pennsylvania, is anybody here not from Pennsylvania? Okay. So in Pennsylvania, one of the benefits of being married, in Pennsylvania, and this is really unique, it's not Ohio, it's not West Virginia, it's not New York. In Pennsylvania, property between husband and wife is afforded the greatest amount of protection for liability. So if I have my assets held jointly, and I drive down the road and wreck into the school bus of gifted children, and there's a $50 million lawsuit, and they sue me for $50 million, they can only get assets in my name. They can't get jointly held property. I can literally file bankruptcy and discharge the obligation. And so when one spouse passes away, the surviving spouse becomes more susceptible to creditor claims. So in my will, what I can do, and what I did do, this is my actual will, is I give everything to my wife Carol, but my wife Carol has the right to disclaim. That's a term that I think I've used up for the disclaimer trust. She can disclaim and put money into a trust. She's the trustee of that trust. She gets all the income, any principal that she needs for her health, maintenance, and support. And my wife can literally put up to $11 million today in that trust. So my wife she has no one to answer to but herself. Any money in that trust is bulletproof from creditors. My wife could literally file bankruptcy, and no one could touch the money. And by the way, my wife has the same provision in her will. And so you can create a tremendous amount of creditor protection. Oh, by the way, although we're not going to be subject to federal estate tax given this exemption, but if the exemption drops, any money in that trust, if it's $1 million today, and my wife lives off the income and it grows to $10 million, that all passes tax-free. It's not subject to federal or state tax either. So when you're putting your will together, not only can you save some taxes, but credit protection now, to what the discussions I'm having today now with clients is, hey, how do I protect my children? How do I protect my spouse? And trust can be very, very flexible, but they can be very, very powerful. And it's not hard. You don't need to have a bank as a trustee. The surviving spouse can be the trustee. Your kids can be the trustees. So it's something to be mindful of. And then, and I'm almost done here, and I apologize if I've gone over my time. The other important documents are a power of attorney. I mentioned to you about the gentleman that had the sign company. If he had given his wife a power of attorney, she could have signed checks, she could have kept the business going. In the living will healthcare directive, if you are incapacitated under HIPAA, the doctors are not supposed to talk to even the spouse. Although in emergency situations they will, and most doctors look the other way. But it's important to have a healthcare power of attorney. Living will is what your intentions are with respect to life support. And HIPAA is just a document, but that it relates to the healthcare disclosure. A number of years ago, my son went to Mexico, he went to Penn State, came back, he got himself in trouble. It was from a healthcare standpoint. It was in the infirmary. They wouldn't talk to him. And it freaked me out, but I learned a lesson. So I wrote an article about the importance of having a power of attorney for adult children. It was actually picked up by Forbes magazine. And I was just actually on Sirius Radio. They interviewed me. Boy, you come up with one good idea and you gotta run with it, right? So if you got a kid that's over 18 years old, if that happens, something happens to that kid, the doctor will not talk to you. And if you think that they will, they won't. And again, unless it's an emergency situation, or you can't get your kids' grades. And so I would suggest you each, if you have adult children, 18 over, have them sign a power of attorney, have them sign a healthcare power of attorney, so you can transact business on their behalf, or talk to a doctor, or whatever the case may be. Again, it's an easy document. A revocable trust, there's a lot of discussion about revocable trust. It's very popular in Florida, it's very popular in California, because the estate administration process is a big pain in the neck. Pennsylvania really isn't that much. We don't do a lot of revocable trusts. We do them, and we can certainly, and it's a way to avoid probate. But again, probate's not that big of a deal. But I will tell you where revocable trusts are very important. If anybody has real estate in another state, Florida, West Virginia, if you pass away with real estate in another state, you're subject to that state's probate process in Pennsylvania. A simple way to handle it is create a revocable trust and redeed the property that's in the other state into that revocable trust. You avoid probate in that state. Very, very simple. But you will spend tens of thousands of dollars, and you're gonna pull your hair out, or I should say, your spouse or your executor will. And the last document is, as mentioned earlier, yes, sir.
Will you touch privacy, public record, probate versus trust? Will you hit that for these folks, please?
Sure. As a matter of fact, we just had this conversation with clients today. So, and we ended up doing a revocable trust. So, I'll tell you what a revocable trust doesn't do, but I think it's important what Nate said, what it can do. So a revocable trust is not going to save you any taxes. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. A revocable trust is not going to speed the process up. You still have to file a Pennsylvania inheritance tax return that's due in 9 months, and you have to wait until the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue gives you your good housekeeping seal of approval. So, and that takes 3, 6, 9 months. So it doesn't speed the process up, it doesn't save any taxes. What it does do, to Nate's point, there was a woman that I met with today, she had a pretty large estate, it was a divorce, it was a very ugly divorce. She doesn't want her ex-husband knowing anything about her, and so we are creating a revocable trust to put everything in there, so that when she passes away, she doesn't have to file her estate at the Register of Wills, which will disclose the assets that she owns. Very few people even know where to go, but if you wanted privacy, and thanks Nate for bringing it up, a revocable trust can provide additional privacy in that situation. Now, what I said to her, in an effort of full disclosure, because you're living in Pennsylvania, if you wanted to be a complete jerk, he'd file a Freedom of Information Act and pull her Pennsylvania inheritance tax return, because you can get the inheritance tax return. So, but again, most people don't want to go to that aggravation, but it's a lot easier to go down to the register of wills. So privacy is important. Is that what you were looking for, Nick? Yeah. And then again, what I wanted, one of the last comments is, you know, life insurance, again, it's a wonderful tool, especially with closely held business owners. It is not subject to income tax. It is subject to estate tax. And what we do is we'll put the insurance into an irrevocable trust agreement. It's not difficult. The only thing this trust holds is a life insurance policy. So when you pass away, if you survive for 3 years, if you put an existing policy in there, or if you get a new policy, because the IRS has a 3-year look back rule, just so you know. Everybody in their deathbed wanted to put these in trust. So if you have a new policy, put it in trust, there's no 3-year look back rule. If you take an existing policy and stick it in there, there's a 3-year look back rule. If you survive for 3 years or put new policy in there, the entire amount is excluded from your estate. There's no federal estate tax. It can be a very powerful tax savings. Also, once it's in that trust, no creditor can get to it. So if you're concerned about being sued and your estate being sued, you get that asset into you get that insurance into an irrevocable trust. So that's something that we work with lots of clients. So.
Correct.
Yeah.
Back here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
When you're talking about the life insurance monies in there, so when these limits from 11 million go down to 5 million, are those, like, if you had large insurance policies in that trust, how would that be affected by the 2026? I mean,
That's a good question. I mean, we actually, the woman that was talking today, we don't have a problem today, but we're gonna have a problem
Yeah.
in 2026. And so, she said, well, let's start the clock ticking now. If you act now, before the exemption drops and something happens, once it's in there, and the 3 years have expired, it doesn't matter whether the exemption is 11 million, 5 million, or it goes away. It's out of your estate. You are effectively giving it away when you put it in there to your spouse or to your children. So most people have a trust for the benefit of their spouse, so their spouse has access to it. So. Does that answer your question?
yes, thank you.
Good. So I apologize if I sped through the outline. I could talk for another 3 hours, but I want to be mindful of the time. So I will answer any questions. Shoot me an email, and don't hesitate to send me an email if you need me want to copy the book.
Correct. Can you just explain a special needs trust?
Yeah. So what I didn't talk about, thanks, Jerry, is we work with lots of families, and some of those families have children with special needs, brothers with special needs, sisters with special needs, or parents for that matter. And what I mean by special needs, when I say it, I know exactly what Jerry was, it might be getting government assistance financially, or they are in programs that they otherwise couldn't get into, but for their special needs. And so in a typical trust, which I talked about, you put a trust for your kids, they get income for life, principal for health and support, that would impact SSI or certain Social Security benefits that a special needs child would otherwise be entitled to. So what we do, because we work with a lot of parents that have children and siblings, you can create a special needs trust that doesn't take them out of the benefits package, and that they continue. It's really a supplemental needs trust, where the trust is a supplement. It's not considered part of their estate for qualification purposes. And again, not that Jerry asked, but there's another woman in our office that does a lot of elder law planning. So they've got parents that are trying to transfer assets, because there's a 5-year look back rule, but there are some techniques that you can use to help your parents transfer wealth down the next generation. Did you have a question?
Yeah, Brad, one of the things that I find when working with clients, and it's a common thing, I see that they don't have any family or kids involved in the business or interested in the business. What would you say to them in a short first steps as far as what to do. They're in retirement age or they're nearing retirement age. I guess, what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, and so there's a lot of questions, but, one of the questions is, it would be back to them is, what do they want to have happen to their business if something would happen to them, pass away? And that's an easier question. And then the question is do you need this business if it stopped today for your retirement? And most people say yes. Some people can't afford to sell their business because it's not worth the money they need to retire, and so they will continue the business because they need that paycheck. Some people say, don't need it, or some people say, I want to sell. I mean, right now I got a phone call, actually a Federated client who's not in this room, and he's had it. And he's got 2 children that are not involved in business, and we're looking at selling the business. And he thinks that the business is worth enough money to have him set for retirement. Does that help?
Yes.
Anybody else have any questions? Thank you for your patience. You were very kind.